dapat po munang alamin or matukoy ang pangunahing problema ng bansa upang mapagtuunan ng pansin at mabigyan ng solusyon.
We should have specific goals, do research, and make a policy that is fair for everyone.
Walang problema sa pulisiya. Iayos lang ang pagpapatupad.
Bago patubas ang batas, pag-aralan muna gusto ng government.
Two things, clarity and execution. Both, you need the communication and monitoring. As simple as that.
Mandato ng Philippine Institute for Development Studies o PIDS na gumawa ng mga pag-aaral at pananaliksik ng mga pulisiya at programa ng pamahalaan at magbigay ng rekomendasyon sa mga mambabatas sa pagbabalangkas ng mga pulisiyang makakatulong sa ating bansa. Sinusulong ng aming ahensya ang evidence-based policy making upang bigyan din ng kahalagahan ng pulisiya na batay sa datos at policy research na sumusuri sa tunay na kalagayan ng ating mga komunidad. Napakahalaga ng policy research, lalo na sa mga panahong dumadaan sa krisis ang ating bansa.
Kapag pulisiya ay pinag-aralan, susulong ang bayan.
In need of references for your research? Do you want a digital library that you can access for free anytime and anywhere? You don't have to look far. SERPI is here for you. SERPI is an online database of socioeconomic materials produced by the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, government agencies, research and academic institutions, and international organizations based in the Philippines. It is the country's first online repository of socioeconomic information, created for policymakers and development practitioners, researchers, educators, and students. To access SERPI, just visit the PIDS website and click the SERPI widget under the Databases tab, or type serp-p.pids.gov.ph. SERPI has a wide variety of materials such as journal articles, books, research papers, working papers, policy notes, audiovisual materials, and more. As of 2022, SERPI has more than 60 partner institutions contributing knowledge resources to the database. SERPI provides a comprehensive coverage of references encompassing 22 research themes: labor and education, gender and development, poverty, technology and innovation, trade and industry, and many more. On the enhanced website of SERPI, you can filter your research by keyword or author, publication type, research theme, or year published, all at the same time. SERPI has more than 7,000 publications and audiovisual materials that you can access and download for free. What are you waiting for? Visit SERPI now. Socioeconomic research portal for the Philippines, innovating knowledge exchange and policy research.
So what is PIDS? For over 40 years, the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, or PIDS, has been the country's foremost socioeconomic think tank. It conducts rigorous and objective policy research and analyses that help the government in crafting relevant policies, plans, and programs in support of the country's long-term vision and development goals. PIDS pursues its mandate through three basic programs: research, dissemination, and outreach. Through its research program, PIDS identifies and prioritizes studies, develops proposals, and conducts research on priority areas. The results of these studies are then disseminated through different platforms, publications, online resources, PIDS Corner, seminars, and the Development Policy Research Month, or DPRM, held every September. To shed light on key policy issues, the advice and expertise of the Institute's research fellows are also sought by policymakers, government agencies, private sector, and civil society. Since 1977, PIDS has completed numerous policy studies on a wide range of development topics. This brand of service has then translated to policies and programs that have improved the lives of every Filipino. Philippine Institute for Development.
Friends, this is a momentous occasion for PIDS as we are launching today its newest book entitled How Modern is Philippine Agriculture and Fisheries, the Agriculture and Fisheries Modernization Act after a quarter century. I'm Sheila Siar, your MC and moderator. To officially start our launch, let us listen to Dr. Marife Ballesteros, the Vice President of PIDS. Dr. Ballesteros?
Good afternoon and welcome to our distinguished guests and participants. I would like to acknowledge the presence of the following officials: the Philippine Ambassador to Mexico, Lilibet Di Pera, the National Scientist and University of the Philippines, Los Baños, Professor Emeritus Dolores Ramirez, Department of Agriculture Undersecretary Mercedita Sombila, Department of Interior and Local Government Assistant Secretary for Community Participation, Elizabeth Lopez de Leon, United States Department of Agriculture Attaché, Mark Hansel, House of Representatives Deputy Secretary General Romulo Miral Jr., PIDS Board of Trustees member, Dr. Gilberto Llanto, the National Food Coalition President, Aurea Teves, Philippine Association of Agriculturists, Chairperson Roberto Ranyola, the Philippine Partnership for Sustainable Agriculture, Country Director Ami Melissa Chua, the Philippine Rice Research Institute Executive Director John De Leon, Cargill Philippines Director Christopher Matthew Ilagan, Foundation of Economic Freedom Director Rhea Lynn Dilka, Carlos Hilado, Memorial State University Vice President for Research, Extension and IP Services, Andrew Eusebio Tan, and the Visayas State University Vice President for Planning, Resource Generation and Auxiliary Services, Diliberto Ferrare. I would like also to greet the various representatives from the government, academe, private sector, civil society, and media who are virtually present today and those watching to the PIDS and SERPI Facebook pages. We are here today to discuss the newest PIDS book entitled How Modern is Philippine Agriculture and Fisheries, the Agriculture and Fisheries Modernization Act after a quarter century. The agriculture and fisheries sector remain a key player in the country's development despite the dominance of our services sector. Our agriculture, land resources, and marine life is vast, and these resources can be harnessed to make significant contribution to food security, employment, export revenues, and poverty reduction. According to the Philippine Statistical Authority data, the total agricultural land used for crop cultivation amounted to 13.44 million hectares in 2020, or that's 45% of the total land area of the Philippines. Our fisheries sector consists of 4 subsectors: aquaculture, marine, commercial, and inland fisheries, which reflects the wealth and breadth of our fisheries resources. Agriculture and fisheries combined accounted for 9% of the country's gross domestic product in 2022, and in the same year, agricultural exports amounted to $2.12 billion, while fisheries exports reached to 1.1 billion US dollars. The agriculture and fisheries sector employs around 25% of the country's labor force. However, we note that poverty incidence is highest among households in the sector. The 2018 Family Income and Expenditure Survey of the PSA reported 31.6% poverty incidence for farming households and 26.2% for those in the fisheries sector. So what do we do now? The book mentions long-term, coordinated, and systematic interventions to ensure competitiveness and sustained growth of the agriculture and fisheries sector. We have to overcome numerous challenges from outdated technologies, inadequate infrastructure, and land development, as well as zoning challenges, to climate change threats and biosecurity concerns, such as the African swine fever outbreak, including man-made disasters such as the recent oil spill in Mindoro and the production and logistic disruptions due to wars. The Agriculture and Fisheries Modernization Act, or AFMA for short, was signed into law in 1997, specifically to address challenges like these by providing a comprehensive framework for the modernization and development of the agriculture and fisheries sector. This law represents a milestone in the country's history as it seeks to promote sustainable development, increasing productivity, and improve the livelihood of farmers, fisherfolk, and their families. So the book, How Modern is Philippine Agriculture and Fisheries, the Agriculture and Fisheries Modernization Act After a Quarter Century, edited by PIDS Senior Research Fellow Dr. Roel Briones, documents and analyzes the achievements of AFMA programs and interventions 25 years after the AFMA was passed into law. The new book includes 10 papers, excluding the synthesis, from 9 leading experts in the sector. I think what is good about this book is that it goes beyond the question of what went wrong, but focuses on how to get things done effectively. We have invited as panelists Academician and national scientist Dr. Emil Javier and Attorney Rhaegee Tamaña of the Office of Senator Cynthia Villar, Mr. Edelito Sangco, Chairperson of the Philippine Family Farmers Agriculture-Fishery-Forestry Cooperatives Federation, or the Agri-Co-op PH. Our discussant will share with us their responses and insights to the issues and recommendations presented in the book. To our discussants, we are honored and grateful to have you at this book launch. So let me conclude by simply saying that we hope that by sharing this book more widely, we can inspire our experts, policymakers, the business sector, civil society organizations, and development agencies to continue to be part of this dialogue and to work together to bring about a Philippine agriculture and fisheries sector that is industrialized and viable. Thank you all for joining us today. I now turn over the floor to our moderator.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ballesteros. To mark this momentous occasion, let us have a photo opportunity with all the book's authors present today and our discussants, and also with Dr. Ballesteros. Please turn on your videos, and we will be assisted by our platform host, Mai. Mai, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. We request all the panelists and chapter authors to please open your video for a quick photo op. All right, so ready? 1, 2, 3, smile, everyone. All right, once more. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mai. Friends, if you have questions about the book, or in case you wish to seek clarification on the presentations that you will hear later, feel free to send them using the Q&A button. Please indicate your name and organization if you want to be identified when I read the questions. And to all the speakers, you may respond by typing your answers, which will be visible to all attendees. Alternatively, you can choose to answer the questions live during the open forum. And for our live stream viewers on Facebook, please use the comment section of Facebook for your questions. Time permitting, we will accommodate as many questions as possible that are relevant to the discussion during the open forum. Okay, at this point, before we go to the book summary, which will be given to us by the volume editor, we would like to hear from you first. The title of the book is How Modern is Philippine Agriculture and Fisheries? And we'd like to get your thoughts on that question. Okay, so we'll have the poll first, okay? May I request the team to flash on the screen our Mentimeter poll? Okay. Thank you very much, Maylee. So flash on the screen is the question and your choices. Okay, so on a scale of 1 to 5, how advanced do you think is Philippine agriculture and fisheries? And you have 5 choices. 1, not advanced at all. 2, slightly advanced. 3, moderately advanced. 4, very advanced. And 5, extremely advanced. To answer, just click the Mentimeter link on the chat box. Okay, so we hope that you will participate in this poll. Maylee, can we see the answers on Mentimeter? Okay, so we would like to get the public pulse on this question before we proceed to the presentations. Okay, so it seems okay. So most participants think that our agriculture and fisheries sector is only slightly advanced. Okay, so there you go. At this point, okay, let us take a closer look at the book and its empirical findings. Okay, and on the screen, we will show you all the authors, and most of whom are present in this launch. And I think Dr. Briones, the volume editor and presenter, will also mention them in his presentation. Okay, so Dr. Roehlano Briones, the volume editor, is a senior research fellow at PIDS, specializing in agricultural policy. He has published numerous journal articles and has edited 5 books on various topics in agriculture and rural development, one of which won the National Academy of Science and Technology Outstanding Book Award in 2022. He has a PhD in economics from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, and did a postdoctoral fellowship at World Fish Center in Penang, Malaysia. Dr. Briones,
Sheila, very generous of you. And I'm very happy to see such a big turnout and such a distinguished audience and reactors. We really appreciate your presence, entertaining or accommodating our invitation. So just as a clarification, this is really a landmark law. Since that time, if you look at every single General Appropriations Act, the national budget of the country, AFMA is always invoked, right? So this is how important that is. Without this AFMA, we don't really have a budget for agriculture and fisheries modernization. Now, just as a clarification, it's already 2023. And why is it quarter century if the law was passed in 1997? My justification is the law took effect in 1998. When the implementing rules and regulations were passed. So the shepherds of this would be include Secretary Angara at the time and Secretary Dar in 1998 as one of the shepherds of this act. So the question is, we are posing the question, how modern is Philippine agriculture? Because it's an Agriculture and Fisheries Modernization Act, right? So 25 years later, has it achieved its objectives? Let's proceed. Next slide. So this book is exactly about that question. Next slide. Now, to evaluate whether the law has achieved its objectives, let's look at what the law says. its own objectives are. Let's go to, I believe this is section 3 of the law, no? And remember, this is a key law. It's the legal framework for agricultural development in the Philippines. Some people might say, oh no, it's the charter of the Department of Agriculture in 1986. But I would argue that this is really the landmark law because how it appears over and over in our General Appropriations Act. So there are actually 10 objectives. So generally, modernizing the agriculture and fisheries sectors, converting farms from resource-based to technology-based. No, that's the complete statement. I should also apologize that I should actually give all of the chapter authors opportunity to speak. But if I do that in detail, we have a choice of doing a 2-day seminar versus a 2-hour book launch like today. In as much as the book is available for all to read for free, I think let's all have just our own chance to really peruse and absorb the contents of the book ourselves. And this is just a short overview. All right. The second objective is to enhance profits and incomes in the agriculture and fisheries sector. And then food security is the third objective. Consolidation, interesting, no? Right now we're hearing a lot about consolidation. It was way back there, 1997, issue of consolidation. Also, empowerment, we've been hearing this for a long time. This was enshrined in the AFMA. Market-driven approach, very controversial these days. But yes, it is a matter of law in the Agriculture and Fisheries Modernization Act. Number 7, value-added ladder. This is very prescient for its time. Right now, we're hearing a lot about industrialization and modern value chains in agriculture. Then rural industry, again, another prescient aspect of the law. They would like to see rural areas industrialize. And then the environment, this has always been a long-standing issue, but right now the law actually made this an objective. And lastly, quality of life, which is kind of a cross-cutting generic objective. Next slide, please. So, question for the book is, were these objectives achieved? If not, okay, so what are the prospects for meeting these objectives? So to understand, to analyze that question or to answer that question, we need to know what needs to be done so that those prospects can materialize. Because if the prospects are favorable, usually it carries an if, right? If this, then it's favorable. But if these don't materialize, then probably it's not going to happen. So next slide. All right, now, this is not by any means the first review. The book actually mentions several past reviews of the Agriculture and Fisheries Modernization Act. And actually, it's not like we disregarded them. We quoted them extensively in this book. We made sure that, you know, we don't reinvent the wheel, but rather we cite them. And if there's any more gaps in our understanding of, you know, the research question, we address them in this book, no? So we focus on outcomes and impacts rather than inputs and strategies. So the previous books, if you look at the structure of the AFMA, it's heavy on the various chapters. So there's a chapter on spatial aspect, no, the SAFDZ, no, there's an infrastructure, and then another chapter on credit, and so on. So these are the various inputs and strategies mandated by the law. And if you look at those previous reviews, I'm not saying that they're bad, they're very good, but from the perspective of those, no? Here, our perspective is strongly emphasizing the outcomes. It's more of a results-based approach to examining or assessing the law. So that's why the core question is how modern. So if the objective was modernizing, so the question now is modern na ba? Okay, so that's how we approach it. And if you look at those objectives, were each of those objectives achieved? And that is the substance of each chapter. Now, the first chapter is just an overview. The second chapter looks at market-based approach. That was one of the objectives of the law. And now we're going to ask, what is market-based approach actually followed in the subsequent quarter century upon effectivity of the act? The third is technology, especially at the farm level. Why does agricultural production level remain low despite increased investments in research and extension? So, oh, by the way, the chapter 1 and 2, the author is myself, so I don't need to mention. But the third chapter is now Dr. Rowena Bacongis, the currently dean in College of Public Affairs in University of the Philippines, Los Baños. So she was she welcomed our invitation to join as one of our key experts. Next slide. Dr. Sangco, Mr. Sangco, Danilo Sangco, a professor of AIM, welcomed our invitation to write the chapter on people empowerment. So this is related to social enterprises. So one of the objectives of the law is not just, just anyway, let's just modernize agriculture and fisheries. No, we want to achieve it through empowerment of farmers and fisher folk. So he wrote that chapter. The next chapter is consolidation. Again, that's one of the objectives of the law. We want to achieve, well, actually it's mentioned in the law, no? Economies of scale to be achieved through consolidation and integration. So Arlene, former dean and right now professor of De La Salle University, together with co-authors, wrote this chapter. Next. The next is whether agriculture and fisheries ascend the value-added ladder. That's one of the objectives of the law, written by, can I say it now, Carlo, Assistant Secretary? Am I jumping the gun?
Yeah.
Just chime in, no? DOF Assistant Secretary. And this is, shall I say, a mother and son team, no? Both economists. Sorry, Professor Adriano, if I mentioned that you were my professor in UP Los Baños. I have to say it. So I learned everything about agricultural development from her knee. Just kidding. But yeah, she was a big contributor. The next chapter relates to structural transformation in the context of technological change, as it deals with the issue of rural industries, which is another objective of the law. So the law is not just about agriculture and fisheries, but the related rural area development, including the formation of rural industries. So that chapter is about that. Next. The last set of chapters relates to the final impact, no? So a lot of these is somewhat related to the means. So we need to modernize value chains, invigorate people's organizations and empowerment and etc. But here, why do we want to invigorate value chains and people's, well, we want to achieve higher profits and incomes in agriculture and fisheries. So I wrote that chapter. We want to achieve food security. So this is the exact statement in the law is accessible, affordable, and stable food supply. That's authored by Ivory Galang, a supervising research specialist in the Philippine Institute for Development Studies. And environment, also, how well as environmental protection. So just because you're modernizing doesn't mean that, okay, let's just elevate the yield and expand our hog resources and fisheries resources and to heck with the environment. No, the law says don't do that. No, in all respects, keep the environment well protected and all of your production sustainable into the far future. And that's the 10th chapter. So after all of these, we have an 11th chapter synthesis. So this synthesis is actually what I'm going to present in summary form today. And of course, the author of chapter 10 is ADB consultant. And if I may mention Maricor, my classmate in the UP School of Economics, Maricor Ibarbia. Okay, so next. Right, so all of these, how will AFMA in the law said they will bring it about? So at that time, hindi pa uso yung the term theory of change. But reading the law, perusing its contents, I think we can infer kind of a theory of change, no? So the AGMA strategies are driven by a market approach towards overcoming a set of macro, meso, and micro, sorry, that's a misprint. Micro, meso, and macro constraints. Micro constraints are there at the farm level. So farms are now what the law says, resource-based, no? So especially if you're rain-fed farm, no, that's more resource-based or very dependent on the weather, on the available soil resources. But the contrast is you apply technology so that you're not that dependent on what Mother Nature provides. Now, when the farms or the operators of the farms, farmers and fishers, no, get together, that's what we call the meso level, so community level. So small farmers and fisher folks are supposed to be empowered by the formation of people's organization and realize economies of scale through collective action. So that's what I call meso level. That's also an objective of the law. And finally, the macro level, which is an economy-wide level, the entire value chain and set of industries is supposed to be also modernized altogether. So we don't imagine, say, fisheries just modernizing by itself. We also need to modernize the canning part, the distribution part. Likewise for rice, not just the actual rice production, but also the milling part, the packaging, and then the delivery to consumers, no? So all of this entails lifting up the whole agriculture and fisheries value-added ladder and spreading industries to rural areas, with the idea being that a lot of these industries will not be concentrated in cities, but because they're so closely linked to agriculture, they're going to be actually located in rural areas. The law already, 1998, envisioned this. So don't think that this is something new. 25 years ago, this was already the vision. Once all of these constraints at the micro, macro, and meso, micro, meso, and macro level are overcome, hopefully this will lead to the intended impacts of the law, which is complete modernization, meaning higher income of small farmers and fisher folk. So no matter what technologies you adopt, etc., unless the farmer and fisher folk income actually increase, I don't think you can claim that agriculture and fisheries has modernized. No matter how tech you claim, how high tech you claim it'll be. Likewise, modernization requires that food security, food supplies are affordable, accessible, adequate, and stable. And lastly, no matter what you claim, how much you boast about how advanced your agriculture and fisheries are, if your environment is devastated, your coral reefs destroyed, your waterways polluted and stinking, So actually we have right now an issue, right, of the oil spillage, maybe unrelated to the action of agriculture, but impacting definitely on the fisheries and other sectors of that area. So all of these are the watch of the law. Next. Okay, now, so I've just posed the questions. What did the chapter authors find? Next. Okay, market approach. So actually, to be honest, perfectly honest, yes, actually, agricultural policy in terms of adopting the market approach has made considerable progress since at least the mid-1990s, exactly coinciding with adoption of the AFMA and other key legislations such as the Agriculture and Fisheries Tarification, the Agricultural Tarification Act, which is part of our accession to the WTO agreement, in 1995, Now, still, state intervention remains pervasive. So it's not like once you pass those laws, you're done. And you can say, okay, market-based approach now. There's still a lot of homework to be done because state intervention and not so market approach remains pervasive, with strong reliance on propping up market price through policy-induced import barriers. So that's one key finding of that chapter. Now, producer support is quite a lot of our spending on agriculture is devoted to this producer support, and it's based on commodities. Rice is the main example, followed by other banner programs such as corn, And the chapter finds that the structure of this producer support is skewed towards input subsidies, seed subsidies, machinery subsidies. Irrigation is very large, and we actually, that's topic of an entire book actually previously of PIDS. And then of course, among the commodities, rice. My own count is 55 billion total rice budget for 2023. Including the National Rice Program, Irrigation, NFA, Phil Rice, and others. That's 1% of the total budget of about 5.5 trillion for the country, just for one commodity, rice. Next. So, okay. So, do I complain about subsidies? Actually, yes. And later I'll show you an alternative to those subsidy-based, fertilizers, seeds, and other inputs and machinery. Next is farm level, overcoming the micro constraints. So again, related to the farm. The chapter showed that actually it's not like there's nothing. There's some productivity growth, some growth in yields, especially for rice and corn. However, if you benchmark it against other countries, we're not doing very well. So if just ourselves versus last year and the previous years, yes, we're advancing, but against other countries, how fast they're growing, no, we've fallen way behind. And in fact, even our so that's the outcome, they say the productivity, even our inputs. So maybe we can say, well, one reason why we have fallen behind is that our inputs to productivity growth have also fallen behind as the rest of Southeast Asia. For instance, the share of public R&D expenditure, according to this chapter, in Philippines is one of the lowest in Southeast Asia. And therefore, that could be directly implicated towards laggard productivity growth. Smallholders are still far from adopting the latest technologies. And not only that, not only do we fail to budget enough, whatever we budget tends to be wasted because of the fragmented governance of our R&D system combined with our extension. So there's actually an active private sector extension for some commodity inputs, and that's actually the saving grace for, say, livestock. But in others that are more dependent on public sector, research, development, and extension, that's where we have been lagging very, very far behind because of the consistent fragmentation. Next. So, next level of constraint is the meso constraint. Now, government, according to the chapter on this, the two chapters, government has been implementing programs to pursue empowerment provisions in the AFMA. So we can see in the various regional development councils, municipal development councils, various other outlets, farmer representation is being elevated. And actually, when we look at the budgetary outlays, it's possible that these outlays have been rising precisely because of that farmer representation. But unfortunately, such interventions remain limited in scope and do not actually reach a large majority of farmers and fisherfolk. Community organizing has tried to reach all, but latest estimate is probably 18 to 20% of our farmers and fisherfolk are a member of some kind of economic enterprise or cooperative or related association. That leaves 80+% unorganized, dealing with the government individually. So, if at all, So, non-government organizations have made it their kind of platform to establish these community organizations. Government said through this AFMA law precisely that they should promote this, but the evaluation of the chapter showed that government is a poor provider of community organization, especially if you benchmark against the performance of non-government organizations. Moreover, even if you look at the farmer representation, it's still evaluated as kind of token, because still, when push comes to shove, who gets to decide where the bulk of the budget goes? It's not the farmers who have to say, but the government officials. So you could argue that, well, that's our electoral system. But, the same electoral system crafted this law. So maybe we should try to reconcile the issues. Next. All right. Furthermore, on the meso constraints, farmer and fishery production still mostly informal. This exists side by side with about 10% of the output is produced by a formal sector. So formally registered farms, agribusiness. Now, related to this, the study by Dr. Inocencio looked at this formal sector and showed that within this formal sector, there was a high degree of horizontal integration, but low degree of vertical integration. So the objective of integration, the AFMA, seems not to have been achieved, except few sectors like poultry. Poultry is now relatively across all sectors, the more highly vertically integrated. No? So the same company tends to be doing from feed production to broiler production to slaughter to dressing and sale to consumers or other end users. So similarly, crops tend to be actually reverse, decreasing trend in terms of concentration, mixed for livestock and poultry, and increasing trend at least for fisheries. And for vertical integration, almost all in poultry and livestock, the trend is increasing, but not that well integrated, say, compared to poultry. Now, do we say that we have achieved economies of scale? Actually, we admit that the evidence is lacking, and this is so it's not like this book answers all your questions. Actually, this book raises more questions than gives answers. No, so we want more study on whether economies of scale have actually been successfully achieved by all of these integration and consolidation trends that have been reviewed in this chapter. Next. All right, so macro level constraints at the industry level. So maybe to understand this better, we look at a typology of value chain starting from traditional to transitioning to modern value chains. So maybe modern value chains, think of, I don't know, fructose corn syrup value chain in the United States. That's an example of a modern value chain, no? How do we assess some of the major value chains in the Philippines? We're not able to assess all of them because there's so many commodities in Philippines. We looked at some of the major ones in the relevant chapter by Adriano et al. And we looked at the corn value chain, which is transitioning. Likewise, milkfish. Tuna is a mix of transitioning and modern, and rice still conditioning. Why do we say that the corn value chain is mostly transitioning? Well, this corn value chain actually encompasses not just corn, but also the subsequent feed using industries, livestock, swine, cattle, and poultry, mostly chicken and duck and some others. It remains weakly integrated with our local corn industry. We still import a lot. And the reason why we import a lot is because our local corn is simply too expensive. No? So even though the sector is highly private sector driven and moving into large-scale production and integrated setup, I already mentioned this is common in chicken. This is still not the case for the other industries such as swine, which is still largely, there's a significant commercial operation there, but the majority is still backyard operation. Milkfish is still dominated by small to medium fisher folk. And I'm not saying that this is not a way to do modern. If they can adopt the most modern technologies, that'll be great. But in fact, it is the larger scale, which is not so common, that is the one adopting the latest modern practices. Tuna is a mix of transitioning and modern value chain. So there is this kind of a dual structure of catching tuna, not in the Philippines anymore, I understand, and then actually, canning it even in the ship, the initial operations of canning in the ship, then landing it. But there's still a very wide preponderance of local tuna capture fisheries to feed our local markets. No? So yung mga tulingan and so on, they're still very abundant. Rice is still mostly transitioning, still dominated by small-scale farmers. There are some modern rice mills, especially in Luzon, that are adopting the most modern practices in very large scale, achieving high milling ratios. But this is not, shall we say, dominant throughout our rice economy in the country. Now, on the area of rural industry, Compared, if you so the chapter went through indicators on rural industry by Dr. Lanzona and found that we are still lagging in terms of rural industry dispersal compared with, again, our ASEAN neighbors. Next. Moving on to impacts. Notice that I'm mentioning so much our ASEAN neighbors because how do we, so we can measure progress, right? We've moved from A to B. How do we know that A to B is enough to modernize? Well, what if our neighbors have moved from A to C, right? So we can benchmark, maybe A to B is short compared to A to C. That's why we mention a lot, benchmarking against our neighbors. So if you look at the goals of AFMA, no, there's been considerable improvements. We cannot deny, if you look at various household surveys, even surveys of the PSA, increased income of agricultural households and reduced poverty among them, at least up to the 2018, the period that was last reviewed. Nevertheless, poverty remains relatively high. No? If I recall, if it's 18% for the country, it's about 26+%, no, for agriculture and fisheries, no, and in fact, this is probably higher after the pandemic. So that's income. We've moved far, so it's not like we're stuck in 1997, the same income of farmers. No, their income has gone up, but not as much. No, the progress is not as fast as the non-agricultural sectors of the economies. It's kind of unfair. The poorest sector is not the sector that has advanced most quickly. Next is food security. The chapter by Ms. Galang showed that availability is generally achieved across various food commodities. Hunger incidence has fallen, and the share of food secure households based on data from FNRI has been increasing. But what are the remaining problems? There are many. Food or diet quality. So the quantity is okay. The quality is very short. No? Why is the quantity very short? One reason is a lot of the nutritious foods are not affordable. So that is why, combining this with other, health-related practices, Philippines is lagging behind the rest of Southeast Asia in eradicating malnutrition. Lastly, looking at environment. So all of these chapters we've been citing, progress here, not as much as the neighbors, etc. But here, correct me, Maricor, if I'm wrong, but from 1998, we're actually arguably worse today than we were. Our environment in agriculture and fisheries is arguably healthier in 1998 than today. Lots of deterioration has happened, no? Coral reefs, soil resources, uplands. The chapter went through all of these systems and found that there are many issues. We've been fighting a losing battle on all of these grounds. So how do we reverse all of this? This is the subject of the next slides. Next. Okay, recommendations. Next. All right, so let's start from the beginning. Okay. So we still have elements of traditional industrial policy, inconsistent with the market approach. We would like to, prop up local prices, help farmers, disadvantage consumers. Maybe another alternative approach is continue to support farmers but a different way through expenditure programs na hindi naman based on distortionary subsidies. Instead, we now have a National Agriculture and Fisheries Modernization and Industrialization Plan that's already enshrined even in the Philippine Development Plan 2023 to 2028. Let's move modernization efforts and spend the budget for this, no? So rather than spending so much money for subsidies, why don't we fund a modern industrial policy for the agri-food system? A lot of this is based on private-public sector partnerships. And the private sector will come in only if the public sector will also ante-up, no? Tataya din siya. Pero the private-public sector often says, oh, we don't have money for that. So why don't you invest 100%? And the private sector says, well, if you're asking 100%, we'd rather invest somewhere else, not in agriculture or fisheries, because blah, blah, blah. So how do we move the needle towards those modernizing of agriculture and fisheries? We need money for that. Maybe that's a more salient element for expenditure rather than the usual. No, let's procure fertilizer, or that's cheap, and then give it away for free for farmers. Then there's a lot of corruption involved. Can we stop doing that? Next. So reforming. So we've been thinking, okay, maybe we can put more money in R&D extension. Yes, that's part of it. But let's look also at the governance structure. Okay, we need to fix that properly. The extension system, so that's already a very long story. We've devolved since 1991, but there are many reforms that we need to be able to make it more coherent and more connected to our R&D system. Moreover, I would argue that instead of banner programs based on commodities, we should adopt more area-based, bottom-up planning. And if you look at the AFMA itself, that's actually what it provided. There are no banner programs provided in AFMA. There's no national rice program provided there. What it provides is strategic agriculture and fisheries development zones. So why don't we take that seriously? No? Area by area, what are the actual needs of the area, and define the commodity requirements of each area rather than, from the top, oh, rice should have so many billions. Let's stop. Let's stop doing that and pay more attention to what the actual areas of the country need, no? Including all the way, not just at the level of farm production, but all the way with the markets, the agribusiness. Now, if you interact with agribusiness, one key factor they're always citing is, look, we don't want, it's difficult for us to have a business model where we interact with farmers with 0.5, 0.7 hectares. It doesn't make sense. Okay, so can we deal with consolidated land holdings and operations? So one way to do this is to, just remove the statutory limits on the ceiling. So 5 hectares, that's one. Another is, there's another set of reforms. Actually, the current administration is pushing through with these reforms, and hopefully they will be implemented, such as the removal of the condonation of remaining amortization of lands covered by land agrarian reform, the CARP, and then hopefully liberalizing, after the condonation, liberalizing the free transaction of these land holdings, so that let's say farmers who are no longer in the circumstance favorable for farming, like they're very old, they're already 70, they have the option of finally converting that land to monetary asset and transferring it to another farmer, probably a young dynamic farmer who can be more productive with it. So our law should enable such transactions rather than stopping them. Next. More on overcoming macro constraints. So we have right now a set of roadmaps. Can we update and implement seriously these roadmaps rather than just have them documents? One signal that they're really being implemented is when the stakeholders buy in and say, yes, they're actually doing it. But if the stakeholders say, oh, we wasted a lot of time doing these roadmaps, and then it turns out government was not serious with them, that's so sad to hear, right? So let's reinvigorate this process and get all the private sector and farmers on board. And finally, a part of these value chain should have a strong spatial component, no? So across regions, provinces, even municipalities, if possible, if we have a regional version of these roadmaps, then we could see how rural industries could possibly disperse. And this is how we can reinvigorate our rural industry dispersal policy. Next. Okay, so all of these are towards achieving the AFMA intended impact. So this is kind of like more reinforcement. Can we evaluate the panel of small farmers and fisher folks today? So maybe this is a prescription for PSA. It's kind of unfair, no? If because of structural change, which I should have mentioned was acknowledged in the AFMA, many of our farmers and fisher folk are actually leaving that profession and moving to, say, industry, construction, and services, because the remaining farmers and fisher folk are able to make do because they are mechanized production and technology. So this transition is happening, but that means it's kind of biased, no? The households. So if we just have a fixed panel in the beginning, say if you start today, then track them up to 2030, then we can really see whether those households, through various economic processes, including modernization and transition to other industries, are actually experiencing increased incomes. So that's one. So policies and programs that address the country's food security needs need to be harmonized. The PDP actually sketches, the current version of the PDP, I've read it, and it sketches one way to be able to achieve that harmonization. For example, more coherent trade policies where you adhere to basis of the law rather than politicized implementation, no? So, and the various other aspects of food security, maintaining buffer stocks and so on. If you could just harmonize those policies and programs, that'll be moving us in the direction of better food security. And finally, being more serious about ecosystem approaches. So we mentioned ecosystem approaches that, you know, let's not just think of reclaiming this coastal zone because that will open up more commercial areas and develop the city. But forgetting that, oh, what about the rest of the values produced by that ruined coastal area because of your reclamation project? So a more ecosystem-based approach would possibly force us to reevaluate a lot of the developmental projects that we're undertaking now, no? So I'm not saying that we should stop all development. I'm saying that a judicious examination based on all of the relevant values, including environmental values, which is part of that ecosystem approach, would do a lot to make sure that, you know, when we advance the development of our swine production, our poultry production, our rice production, we don't do unintended harm to greenhouse in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, water pollution, and the rest of it, no? So all of this, how do we tie them together? Interestingly, the AFMA itself provides for a program benefit monitoring and evaluation system, PBMES. So whether we call it that or some kind of results-based management approach. Now, this approach was starting to be implemented in the 2010s by Philippine government. But we still largely do a knee-jerk type of programming and policy, in my assessment. No, the closer we can shift our policy and programming towards a more results-based approach, meaning, is it working? Is this subsidy program really achieving its objectives? Or maybe we're just wasting our money and then maybe we can think of something else. If we start introducing that thinking and the system to check, no, whether it's really working because we have that monitoring system, that'll be a dramatic change in the way we do business in developing the agriculture and fisheries sector. Next. All right, so sorry for that kind of extended summary. I hope that by reading the book, you can flesh out all of the details of the kind of throwaway statements I made, no? Because I guarantee that a lot of these were well argued, and we have numbers and indicators to back up this results-based assessment of modernization of Philippine agriculture and fisheries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Briones, for that succinct yet comprehensive presentation of the book's main findings and recommendations. By the way, if you haven't downloaded the e-copy of the book, it's available on the PIDS website. At this point, let us listen to the reactions of our discussants, and we are honored by the presence of three experts, the first of whom is a distinguished agricultural scientist. Our first discussant is Dr. Emil Javier, national scientist and academician. Dr. Javier is a Filipino agronomist and was the first and only developing country scientist to chair the Technical Advisory Committee of the prestigious Consultative Group for International Agricultural Research, or CGIAR, a global consortium led by the World Bank and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. He was Director General of the Asian Vegetable Research and Development Center based in Taiwan, and has served as chairman of the board of the International Rice Research Institute and Chairman and Acting Director of the Southeast Asian Regional Center for Graduate Study and Research in Agriculture. In at various periods in the Philippines, he had been President of the University of the Philippines, Minister for Science and Technology, President of the National Academy of Science and Technology, and Chancellor of the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. Dr. Javier holds doctorate and master's degrees in plant breeding and agronomy from Cornell University and University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, respectively, and he completed his bachelor's degree in agriculture at the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Emil Javier. Sir?
Good afternoon, everybody. Since we are pressed for time, I hope you don't mind if I omit the pleasantries, except to congratulate and thank the present and past officers and staff of PIDS for performing very well as a think tank in the Philippines. In fact, whenever I am confronted with an issue in agriculture, the first thing I do is to find out if PIDS has a publication on the issue. So congratulations and thanks to the officers and staff of PIDS now and in the past. Let me also compliment the 11 authors of the book for their incisive and well thought out analysis of the various aspects of the modernization of agriculture as prescribed in the Agriculture and Fisheries Modernization Act of 1997, or APMA. Indeed, by the three gross measures of modernization, in terms of productivity, in terms of farmers' income, and ecological sustainability, I think we are all agreed that we fell short of the ambitions of APMA. However, to assert that APMA failed is unfair and not correct. As pointed out by the authors, and as we all recognize, some progress had been achieved, albeit not enough, especially if we benchmark ourselves with our ASEAN neighbors with broadly the same growing conditions. Expressed another way, we can say that we could have done better. We could have done much better. But at this time, assigning blame and shortcomings is pointless because actually there's so much blame to spread around. Better we look forward, learn our lessons, and move on. Actually, I find myself in agreement with most of the narratives and prescriptions by the authors in the book that we are launching today. So I decided that I will take on 9 of these 9 specific issues that they have laid out, mainly to support them and express my agreement, but also hopefully able to bring forward my ideas and suggestions of specific programs to bring them about. So for this afternoon, I'm taking on 9 issues, the first 3 being what I consider the strategic challenges and opportunities we have to address moving forward, namely the challenge of further elevating our primary productivity, the challenge of commodity diversification and promotion of exports, and the challenge of industrialization. But in order to make progress on these three major challenges and opportunities, we have to bring about the enabling conditions, which will include clustering and consolidation, unifying our small farm operations with the modern corporate sector to build stronger, more resilient, competitive supply chains, mobilizing the local governments to drive the modernization of agriculture in their constituency, the increasing share of agriculture investments, recapacitating the Department of Agriculture, Department of Science, and the agencies to supply the human resources and technology requirements of a modern agricultural sector. And finally, a caution on the organization. And to point out some of my reservations on some of the observations and conclusions, although they are relatively minor. The first major strategic direction that we really have to move on is further elevating our primary productivity. I think you could read faster than me speaking, so I will allow you to read most of it, but really limit my talk to specific recommendations. The principal factors for productivity are seeds, fertilizers, and water. And we are relatively okay with seeds because we have a very good private sector and very good public plant breeding organizations. So we are okay with seeds. But the real explanation to me of our relatively lower productivity compared with our African neighbors is our relatively low commercial fertilizer application. And for this reason, I think that although reluctantly, I think we really should move ahead and temporarily subsidize commercial fertilizer used by our small farmers, especially this trying period when we are trying to recover from the pandemic as well as the consequences of our problems in fertilizer availability because of the war in Ukraine. Secondly, we are all right in terms of our water policy. I think our national policy of investing in irrigation is correct. We should continue investing in irrigation systems. Out of our 3.1 million hectares of prime land suitable for irrigation, we have developed 2 million. So we still have more than 1 million to go. But it is not to say that everything is okay. There are certain things that we need to do better. And one of which is we must realign the budget of NIA so that they will provide more funding for irrigation management transfer or support to the Irrigators Association. The historical budget of NIA for irrigation management transfer is about 100 million a year. I think this ought to be 1.5 billion pesos a year. The second major strategic direction is commodity diversification and promotion of exports. Actually, even in our three major commodities, rice, corn, and coconut, there is so much potential for diversification. For rice and corn, our main crops, we could grow a lot of high-value products by succession cropping between and after the main crops of rice and corn. In the case of coconut, we have 3.6 million hectares, only a third of which are profitably intercropped. So we have more than 2 million hectares of coconut suitable for intercropping. However, to do this, there's a very major important initiative with regards to the irrigation systems, which are now mainly planted to rice. If you want our farmers to get into commodity diversification and growing other crops in addition to rice, we must embed small irrigation systems into the large system so that the farmers can have full control of water availability. With regards to coconut and the other commodity programs, we must clearly spell out the diversification objective in the rice, corn, and coconut commodity roadmaps. For example, in terms of coconut intercropping, we can easily grow coffee and the coconuts and replace the 60,000 tons of coffee beans we are importing every year by just focusing our activities on 100 towns, which can specialize in coconut coffee growing. The third specific direction is industrialization and processing. We should continue the program of partly subsidizing machineries for small farmers, but through their cooperatives. We need more applied adaptive research and commercial demonstrations on food processing and packaging, particularly at downstate. This is being done, but I think we should do more. And specific comments on livestock. Our most successful livestock cooperatives are invariably those associated with the feed mills. So, and this has to do also with the integration of corn with livestock. So one of my suggestions is that in enriching or empowering our livestock cooperatives, we should include in their financing their access to putting up feed mills and grain facilities. Next. The third major direction is clustering and consolidation. I think our program of coursing government support and subsidies through the Irrigators Association, Agrarian Reform Beneficiaries Organizations, and cooperatives should continue. I think we should not give up on the IAs, ARBOs, and cooperatives, and in fact, pour in more resources and support to them. And one of the specific recommendations we have to make sure the Department of Agriculture takes on the responsibility of organizing and supporting cooperatives in agriculture is to establish the Bureau of Agri-Industrial Cooperatives in the Department of Agriculture, which was phased out some time ago. And then a comment on agrarian reform. One of the unintended consequences of agrarian reform is further fragmentation of our lands. I think it's now time that we declare victory in agrarian reform, move on, and then lift the limits to farm holdings as mentioned by Briones. Very important is our ability to compete with the food and agriculture imports. And the name of the game is our supply chains. And we have to shape up so that our own farms, especially small farms, can hold their own. Unfortunately, as individuals, they are at a very serious disadvantage. However, we do have examples of domestic banana, pineapple, food and beverage corporations holding their own in regional global markets. And therefore, we can do it. So I think the idea is we got to provide incentives to the corporate sector to engage in contract growing and inclusion of small farmer co-ops in their supply chains. There is a recent big initiative by Go Negocio, led by Concepcion, and I think we should rally behind that initiative of Go Negocio. One aspect that we have not given as much attention is how do we mobilize the local governments in driving modernization in their constituency. Again, one of the unfortunate consequences of devolution was the weakening of our extension system. So we have realized that devolving rural extension all the way to the level of towns was suboptimal because the towns didn't have enough sufficient manpower and resources. So we propose that we elevate the level of the focus of the locus of direction and coordination of agricultural extension to the level of the provinces. So we are proposing what we call the Agriculture and Fisheries province-led agriculture and fisheries extension system. And the idea really is to really rally the provincial governors, 81 of them, to be the champions for modernization of agriculture in their respective constituencies. Imagine we have 81 mini secretaries of agriculture in each of our provinces. And of course, to make the LGUs behave accordingly, the best is to provide generous matching funds for agriculture, which the Department of Agriculture will share with the LGUs in their efforts to modernize agriculture. Certainly, if we want to progress in agriculture, we have to invest more. The last number I saw is that from ACPC, this is quite dated. Only about 1.3% of total bank lending is for primary agriculture. That's not good enough. So we really have to mobilize more investments in agriculture. One of the things that we have been advocating, and I think it's being done now, is to ante up public expenditures for agriculture in the General Appropriations Act. As comparison, our investments for agriculture in the GAA is the order of 1.7% against 4 to 6% of our ASEAN competitors. So we should double our GAA for agriculture. One of our principal institutions in investments in agriculture is, of course, the land bank. And for the last 2 or 3 years, the land bank is doing quite well. From about 800 to 900 farmers that they have been lending to, their latest goal is 3.6 million. So the land bank is doing its share. But in order for land bank to do more, because they ought to do more, one of our proposals is to exempt land bank for the next 10 years from remitting half of their income to the national treasury. So that land bank will have resources to cross-subsidize and further expand rural lending. In their latest report of 2022, land bank earnings was 30 billion. So that would mean land bank can keep 15 billion with which to cross-subsidize lending. And finally, this has been done already in the rice tarification law. We should earmark all the food import tariffs for investments in agriculture. We need more trained manpower and better technologies to sustain our modernization. For the most part, the SUCs and the scientific institutes of DOST are in place. They are doing their job, although they need more funds and they're having problems of obsolete equipment as well as inbreeding. And also, it's a sad story, but graduate level expertise in DA and its agency is scarce. So our prescription is raise R&D and higher education appropriations for agriculture, specifically the SUCs to help DA now by scaling up their in-service short-term specialist training for DA personnel. In Los Baños, we used to have 2,000 DA personnel undertaking those kinds of short-term specialist training per year. But right now, there's none. Somehow we have forgotten about that very important aspect of specialist training. Similarly, we got to have more graduate level personnel in DA. But our usual program of thesis, of degree programs requiring thesis, takes too long. So I think the SUCs should adopt the MBA type of graduate program, which are professional degrees and non-thesis, so that they can be processed accordingly. And last is my comments and some of my reservations. The call for reorganizations are there all the time. But after so many years at my age, I come around the realization that most of those reorganizations of DA have not worked, actually were ill-advised. For example, I still don't think the phase out of the Bureau of Agricon, the Bureau of Agri-Extension, the Agri-Statistics and Agricultural Cooperatives, their phase out in DA were ill-advised. So instead of phasing them out, we should have resorted to training good leaders, managers, team building, and changing mindsets. Secondly, I have reservation with the repeated references to commodity programs as being a major constraint in agriculture planning and implementation. I think otherwise. I couldn't think of how else can you organize agriculture except along commodity lines and their political subdivisions under the law. So instead of harping against commodity programs, I think the idea is we should make sure that the commodity programs are planned and implemented in the context of supply chains, not throwing away the baby with the bathwater. And finally, overinvestment in rice. Again, this has been referred to so many times. On the first principle, it is correct. If you apply the principle of congruence, of the gross value added of the commodity and share in budget. In the case of rice, they say 60 billion of that is invested in rice. But if you take a closer look, easily 35, 40 billion of those is for irrigation. How can we overinvest in irrigation? For a country with a very narrow land people availability ratio, we have to increase productivity of our limited rice lands, of our farmlands. And in tropical agriculture, the single most important factor in raising land productivity is water. So we cannot overinvest in water. Unfortunately, the irrigation systems are really designed for rice. But there is an easy technology fix. And this is aligned with our need for diversification. As I mentioned previously, we should embed small irrigation systems in the large so that the large systems could be suitable also for diversification. So anyway, this is the relatively minor point, but I think we should see clearly that that overinvestment in rice may not be called for. Maybe the interpretation is we are investing correctly in rice, but we didn't have money to invest in the other commodities. So thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Dr. Javier. We appreciate the insights that you shared. It's an honor, someone with your stature, experience, and knowledge participate in this book launch, and what a privilege for us to listen to your insights. Okay, our next discussant represents the office of Senator Cynthia Villar, Chairperson of the Senate Committee in Agriculture. Let us all welcome Attorney Rhaegee Tamaña, Chief of Staff of Senator Villar and Director 5 of the Senate Committee on Agriculture and Food. Before her assignment, she was the Executive Director of the Villar Foundation. She finished her bachelor's degree in psychology and her Bachelor of Laws at the Lyceum of the Philippines, and as a master's degree in public administration from the Ateneo School of Government. Attorney Rhaegee, the virtual floor is now yours.
Thank you very much. Is the audio okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for inviting me to be part of this virtual launch of the PIDS newest book, How to Modernize the Philippine Agriculture and Fisheries, or looking back at the AFMA after a quarter of century. I'm glad to be here. I would like to congratulate Dr. Briones, the volume editor in PIDS, and the co-authors of the book for the cursory review of the law. My fellow panelist, Dr. Emil Javier, who just spoke, I'm honored to be with you, sir. And I look forward to hearing Ms. Estrella Penuña Banzuela of the Asian Farmers Association on Sustainable Rural Development, also on her comment on the law. I'm convinced that the evaluation of the AFMA is timely since it was passed in 1997. It was created to provide a policy framework for the development and modernization of the agriculture industry in the Philippines. It equates modernity in terms of 5 equivalent factors: poverty alleviation and social equity, food security, global competitiveness, sustainable development, income profitability for farmers and fisher folks, and then the 6th, the trade and fiscal incentives. The implementation of AFMA, as I believe so, remains to be incomplete. Marketing support provision has not been implemented. The product standardization is optional. The Rural Non-Farm Employment Initiative under the AFMA has not taken off. And the rural industrialization and industry dispersal envisioned to result an interplay of market forces has never been actualized. I agree to the comment of the previous speaker that the development of agriculture should be a bottom-up approach, wherein the LGUs take an active part, and the relationship of these LGUs into the regional development councils should be taken seriously, not just having them in a meeting and discussing and submitting a report and recommendation, and after the end of the year, not knowing where have they gone, how far have they gone. It should be taken seriously. Also, AFMA as a framework should be supported by funds. I agree that it has DA, the Department of Agriculture, has very limited support in the budget, but it's the sharing of the pie. We only have a few amount of money in our hands, so the best way is to share it among the other department of government on how to implement better services. But the point there is not just the funds, the effectiveness of using these funds. We have never monitored. We only get to see the DA during the budget presentation. And then in the exercise of congressional oversight, we have to call them to get the report when law specifically states that they have to submit judiciously the required reports to both houses of Congress. Poverty incidence has not been improved, although it did in a little sense, but that's too little to say an accomplishment. In 2022, the Philippine Statistical Authority has set the poverty threshold at 12,030 per month for a family of 5, or 79 pesos per day per person to spend on food and non-food. It is very unfortunate that the farmers and fisher folks are only half of this. So those that gives us food cannot even feed themselves. We are confronted with a lot of issues: food security, climate change, smuggling recently, hoarding recently, price manipulations as in the onions and chicken and poultry issues, beef and pork, and even in the fertilizer. It has indirectly wiped out or dampened the enthusiasm of farmers to go and continue feeding us. If we will continue letting this happen, no farmer or farm worker or fisher folk and their families will stay on the fields. AFMA is a good framework. It sets a good standard and the parameters on how to modernize and make agriculture competitive. My suggestion is like what we're doing before with my good friend, Dr. Briones. Before we write a law, we study and make comparison on how we are, where we are, compared to the best in the world. Say, for example, we're writing a bill on livestock, poultry, and dairy development. And we're looking at India. India is the world's largest milk producer. How do we compare with India? How do they produce their milk? Do you know that there, the best and the biggest supplier of milk is a cooperative? So meaning horizontal integration is very important in getting the economies of scale. The producer of fresh vegetables, we go to China, India, US, Turkey. China produces 50% of the world's vegetable, producing 500 million tons. They do it in 3 ways: state-owned vegetable companies, semi-governmental supply and marketing cooperatives, and plain cooperatives of farmers. So meaning there are other models that we can copy in doing the best in our crop development in the country. For example, beef. If we want to produce the best beef and not import a lot, we look at how United States and Brazil and also China do it. In Brazil, what they do is that they have formed importing and exporting relationship via companies. They have allowed their companies to prosper. So meaning, these are not for individual farmers to do. Likewise, there is a dramatic shift in the hog industry in the United States. Instead of doing it backyard, they do large operations. They do conglomerations, words that will shock the ordinary farmers in the Philippines. The top producer of rice, for instance, China, Indonesia, India, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Thailand, Myanmar, are into a heavy application of research and development. They do a lot of studies in the breeding of quality of rice and the fertility of the soil, lowering of water usage. In Vietnam, rice breeding is likewise highlighted. It is not just about the Mekong River. It is about research on what to do, which rice genome sequence is best and helpful, and location-specific rice farming. But it's unfortunate that in the Philippines, although we have given a small budget in research, it is not shared to the farmer population. We've been in agriculture for the past 6 years, and before the implementation of the rice tariffication law, farmers have never been part of the circle of research output sharing. I don't know, and I don't want to. That's a big issue in the past hearing, and it got negative results. But I understood that there is a little budget given to them. But the budget, once the research has been done, is not shared. Let's take the instance of the research done in coconut hybrids. The research was spent at the Davao Research Center, but the results of the research in the development of the hybrid seeds were given to or sold to, given for free, not to small farmers, but to big corporations. Nobody has been monitoring the output of the research. Also in Vietnam, we studied how they do better rice production than the Philippines. And we found out, based on the study by Dr. Lisa Borday of Rice, that better seeds and mechanization is the key. And we have adapted that in the rice tariffication law. The cost of rice produced in the Philippines currently is, or the cost of palay is 12.72 per kilo in the Philippines and 6.22 in Vietnam and 8.86 pesos in Thailand. The biggest expense is mechanization and the quality of seeds. Now the question is on the side. Can a local farmer and his family by themselves make their farm profitable? With the insight of having 1.2 hectares per family, my answer is no. For example, the largest pig breeder in China, Xing Lingling, owns a multi-billion Mu Yuan foodstuff business. It is in the model is via a corporation. Harry Stein, a noted licensed breeder of corn, seeds, and soybeans, has his company engaged in breedings and genetics. it is also through a corporation. Liu Songjing started Hope Group for the business of breeding chickens and quails, and now his net worth is estimated at 12 billion US dollars. It is also a corporation. In the Philippines, the top 10 provinces recently listed by COA, 6 out of 10 of them have agriculture as a base, meaning there is a chance. There is a chance for agriculture to grow as long as the local government partners with the Department of Agriculture. The devolution of the powers of the two local governments in training, extension, execution of agriculture. I agree with Dr. Emil Javier, should be encouraged. There should be unity. And it should be taken up also in the regional development councils at the farmer level. Since the Mandanas ruling has been implemented, budget has been given to the LGUs to the lowest, meaning barangay, municipalities and cities, and the provinces. The synchronization of the development agenda and the identification of the land, whether it's for crops, for livestock, for poultry, for dairy, should be unified and synchronized. The absence of the sub-DZ can be taken up in the Regional Development Council or the Provincial Development Council. That is my opinion on that, on the agricultural development. And AFMA, before it came in 1997 and promotes agriculture. United Nations Sustainable Development Goals started in 1992, but became a compelling objective by the members of UN only in 2015. Meaning, AFMA has all its good intentions and positive evaluation of the Philippine conditions at that time. So it is not far from the SDGs. It talks about addressing environmental challenges. It talks about poverty alleviation. It talks about food security, biodiversity, etc. The writers of AFMA are correct, except that it was not properly implemented nor supported with budget. And in support of the development of agriculture, being an employee in the Senate and a staff of Senator Cynthia Villar, we have passed a number of laws that directly or indirectly supports the objectives of AFMA. For one, Republic Act 10659, or the act promoting and supporting the sugar industry. There, we define the development of black farms, socialized credit, research and development, infrastructure support. Except that the people implementing at the SRA were not able to maximize the 2 billion given to them every year. Money for gun effort, for gun dreams. But we never should give up on that. RA 10654, or the IUUF law, was also authored by Senator Villar. It made amendments to the Philippine Fisheries Code of 1998. It places heavy penalties on illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing. Unfortunately, it's all about unfortunate things. Unfortunately, the execution of the penalties has not brought about revenues, because as provided for in the law, once caught, you have to pay the fine, and then that fine will be placed into a fund for the development of the small fisher folks in the municipal waters. Fortunately, since the law was passed in 2015, this has never been actually implemented for the benefit of the small fisher folks in the municipal waters. So the poverty alleviation approach and the improvement of aquaculture and the conservation, protection, and sustained management of the fishery and aquatic resources has never been achieved. And that's why the deterioration of the marine fisheries at the moment is obviously bringing lack of fisheries resources on our diet, on our table. We have to import despite the vast and expansive seas of the Philippines. RA 10848 is the extension of the Agricultural Competitiveness Enhancement Fund. It did not brought about the development of micro, small, and medium enterprises. So therefore, it's also is a failure. Now, RA 10845, an act declaring large-scale agricultural smuggling as economic sabotage and prescribing penalties therefore, and for other purposes, hopes to prevent smuggling and prosecute them, but unfortunately, no one has been put to prison. The law was enacted to protect the local agricultural industries from smuggled items that will dampen the farm gate prices of local farmers. But as you have seen and heard and experienced in the onions during Christmas, farm gate price is at 18 pesos in Nueva Ecija and 8 pesos in Mindoro, but are sold in the market at exorbitantly 650 to 700 pesos per kilo. This is a good law that my boss has passed in 2016, an act providing the development and promoting of farm tourism in the Philippines. It incorporated an additional income for a farm owner by providing opportunities for a farm to be a farm tourism site and a training site, a farm school. To date, there are 2,367 farm schools which have helped in a way to reach out to an ordinary farmer and be able to teach them the proper technologies in agriculture. It is also a support system for the RCEP, because the RCEP mandates the training of farmers and farmers associations and cooperatives via farm schools, and the accreditation of these farm schools with TESDA and the Agricultural Training Institute to get government grants via scholarship. It is also provided for in the coconut farmers and industry development, that the training component be given to reach out for the coconut farmers and for the promotion of intercropping, coconut production, coconut hybridization, native animals development, and dairy industry development under the coconut tree. The promotion of the halal export development program in the country was passed under RA 10817 in 2016, because this is about allowing our halal produce to be accredited in the international markets to be able to supplement the trading partners of our farmers in manufacturing, production, distribution, preparation, handling, storage, and verification of halal-approved food and non-food merchandises and services. Also, in the Republic Act 10969 in February 2018 was passed, providing for free irrigation service, amending for the purpose Republic Act number 3601, which exempt the payment of irrigation fees for land holdings up to 8 hectares and below for free irrigation services. Meaning, the cost of irrigation can be put to use by farmers as an additional input resource.
Attorney Rhaegee, with all due respect, ma'am, may we request you to wrap up your comments? Salamat po.
Okay. Meaning, as a legislator, Senator Cynthia Villar tried to integrate the good principles and strategies enumerated in the AFMA that was not actualized either way by the Department of Agriculture or other implementing agencies. So in the future, we intend to also develop other industries like the salt industry, the livestock industry, the dairy industry, and by the laws that we will pass soonest, the corn. So I hope that the PIDS and my good friend Dr. Briones will again assist us in crafting these important laws. We are also in the process of condoning the loans of farmers that has not been paid, to make them free to decide on what to do with their lands. There are a lot of things that I have learned from Dr. Briones in the course of our discussion in the past, and his explanation of why AFMA is as it is right now can be supported by the development of other laws in support of agriculture industries and in support of the small farmers. But Roel, our focus is the small farmers and integrating them into a bigger system through a co-op, and the consolidating and making the local government active in developing and trying to determine what to do with them, how to help them. And I hope that in my humble way, I was able to comment on the very nice analysis of the AFMA law by the writers and Dr. Briones and PIDS. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to Attorney Rhaegee from the office of Senator Villar. Okay, so for our last set of comments, let's listen to the voice of our farmers through Mr. Edelito Sangco, Chairperson of the Socorro Empowered People's Cooperative and the Philippine Family Farmers Agriculture-Fishery-Forestry Cooperatives Federation, an affiliate of the Asian Farmers Association for Sustainable Rural Development. Mr. Sangco has been an agricultural extension worker for the past 36 years and had worked with the Department of Agriculture and then he worked at the municipal local government unit of Socorro in Surigao del Norte, where he currently serves as a municipal agriculturist. He has a bachelor's degree in agriculture and a master's degree in public management from the University of the Philippines. Mr. Sangco, sir, you may proceed.
Can I share my screen, ma'am?
Yes, sir. Go ahead po. Sir, please go to the first slide and then please click the PowerPoint.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be making some comments and insights on recommendations embodied in Chapter 3 and 4, and also I'll be providing key takeaways. In Chapter 3, there's a recommendation which states that to introduce innovations in the management of extension programs. That's found in page 116. My comment about the recommendation: the day regional field offices have already informed their counterparts in the LGUs to prepare for the eventual phase out of nationally funded agri-fishery programs, projects, and activities, especially those being embodied in Section 17 of the Local Government Code, within a period of 3 years, as the funds intended for the purpose already form part of the increased national tax allocation for LGUs by virtue of the Bandanas-Garcia ruling. However, for the lack of specific DBM guidelines allocating certain percentage of agri-fishery development projects like that of GAD and other funds, the notion that the increase in the national tax allocation of LGUs due to the Bandanas-Garcia ruling is a manna from heaven for devolved offices is far from the truth. During the budget process, heads of devolved offices have to beg for a slice of the budget pie. More often than not, for lack of LGU officials' prioritization, agricultural extension service delivery ends up getting the budget crumb. The PAFIS, or the Province-Led Agriculture and Fisheries Extension System, is truly a noble innovation, but still it is subject to the provincial governor's appetite for agri-fishery development. More often than not, municipalities and component cities whose mayors are not aligned with the governor's party end up being sidelined in the PAFIS allocation. Another recommendation in Chapter 3 is management of extension programs can be improved by partnering with the private sector. It's found in page 117. And my comment: as a graduate of a 1-month training course in Japan, I can confidently say that the Japan agricultural extension model is best suited for the current Philippine agricultural extension situation. Because in Japan, agricultural extension officers are employed by the government, while the farm advisors are connected with the various agricultural cooperatives. Lamak Multipurpose Cooperative in Cebu, whose general manager is also an IDACA alumna, employs their own agricultural technicians. Another recommendation in Chapter 4, which is vigorously pursue the farm and fisheries clustering and consolidation program, is found in page 147. My comment: the former secretary launched the F2C2 last 2020, but until the present, the program has not gained traction, the expected traction, due mainly to the reason that agro-enterprise clustering approach requires vigorous community organizing, which unfortunately does not belong to the expertise of the government. The Agro-Enterprise Development Program in Cebu and other parts of Visayas is highly successful as it is being implemented by the Lamak MPC with guidance with a consultant from Jollibee Foods Corporation. Another recommendation is to boost management capability of agricultural cooperatives through #1 joint management. It's found also in page 147. My comment, undoubtedly, large cooperatives are created in the pursuit of the universal cooperative principles as opposed to being just organized to serve as conduit for government programs and projects. By engaging in business with ethics and on trust, they have withstood the test of time. Through the years, they have accumulated vast amount of wealth, not just in terms of current and non-current assets, but also a treasure trove of governance and managerial knowledge, attitudes, and skills. While it is true that large cooperatives can act as big brother or sister to small agricultural cooperatives, but only a few of them are engaged into agribusiness. Unless large cooperatives are incentivized, they tend to be satisfied with past success in credit and savings operations and do nothing to become part and parcel in the pursuit of agriculture and fisheries modernization. Another recommendation is social franchising. It's also found in page 147. My comment, truly the leading cooperative federations in the country are those engaged in credit and savings. In fact, the Philippine Family Farmers Agriculture-Fishery-Forestry Cooperatives Federation was organized in 2017 through the initiative of the Pakisama with the support of international non-government agri-agencies out of the urgent need to have an agri-based federation that can provide full value chain services to agricultural cooperatives. If government can tap this large federation of cooperatives, the social franchising initiative of FPSDC can rapidly be replicated to the benefit of small farmers and fisherfolk. Another recommendation is the management services contracting. Again, my comment, as in the case of large savings and credit co-ops, there is tendency for large federations to just sit on their laurels. Unless there is a compelling reason for them to do otherwise, they will do nothing to help fledgling agricultural cooperatives to stay afloat. As for them, the cooperative principle of cooperation among cooperatives is only applicable to their member primary cooperatives. However, unlike other business models, cooperatives and their federations exercised and lived by heart the 7th co-op principle of concern for the community. If they would be incentivized, large credit and savings co-op federations can be a potent force in achieving agri-fishery modernization in the country. My takeaways, #1, the extension delivery system in the Philippines is in a total mess. It is not only fragmented, but it is shattered due to its devolution to LGUs. Unless the deficiency on the absence of specific percentage allocation for the agri-fishery development is cured, the Bandanas Garcia ruling would just be adding insult to instead of healing the injury. My solution, #1, incentivize through tax breaks and other forms of motivation the large credit and savings cooperatives to engage in agro-enterprise clustering approach in their respective areas of operation and hire farm advisors of their own to serve as coaches to the farmer and fisherfolk clusters through their officers. Such farm advisors are potent partners of government agricultural extension workers in the delivery of the needed technology transfers and other support services to small farmers and fisherfolks. Another solution, incentivize again through tax breaks or other forms of motivation the large credit and savings cooperatives to organize on a demand-driven manner What I mean by demand is upon request of the LGUs, subsidiary agricultural cooperatives to spearhead in the agro-enterprise clustering approach, or the ICA, in cities and municipalities outside of their areas of operation. Organizing subsidiary cooperatives is allowed by law in the Public Act 7520 and its implementing rules and regulations. But there's a big question. Shall the local chief executive request the agricultural cooperatives to become partners in ICA implementation? My answer is yes, if and only if the agro-enterprise clustering approach implementation shall form part of the criteria on the sale of good local governance, because LGUs will only act if those activities are included in the criteria of SGLG. And then if they engage in as partners of large and savings cooperatives, and then another incentive for them is to provide reward in the form of agri-fishery projects to SGLG awardees with outstanding ICA implementation in the respective jurisdiction. So that's another motivation for LGUs to partner with large cooperatives in the implementation of ICA in their areas. Takeaway number 3. Government agencies, cooperatives, and federations need to collaborate closely to empower small farmers and fisherfolk. For the Agricultural Training Institute, they need to accredit agri-fishery farms owned by cooperatives into learning sites for agriculture. And for TESDA, to accredit learning site for agriculture as farm school, and then allocate numerous slots for agro-entrepreneurship NC4 to existing established farm schools in the country like that of Lamak MPC in Cebu. And then cooperatives would recruit potential farm advisors and send them for agro-entrepreneurship NC4 training and assessment. And then TESDA to allocate numerous slots to co-ops operating farm schools with approved agro-entrepreneurship NC2 and NC3 qualifications. And then the farm schools operated by cooperatives to conduct training and assessment on agro-entrepreneurship NC2 and 3. And then by that time, the large cooperatives would be ready into agro-enterprise clustering approach among small farmers and fisher folks who are agro-entrepreneurship NC2 holders. So that's the time that the co-ops will start the ICA process. And then the cooperatives need to deliberately incorporate the 5 stages of people empowerment. I am quoting this one. I got this from Professor Patrick Wanan in my master's days at NCPAG. That first, there will be critical awareness on the underlying factors of powerlessness among the farmers and fisher folks. And then the second would be acknowledgement of strength in numbers. And the third would be concrete involvement in group activities. That is the third stage. There would be deliberate group activities like meetings, voluntary establishment of training centers or whatever, so that they will be involved concretely. Those who will not involve concretely, aalis yan sa cluster. And those who will continue, then they will go to the next stage. That would be commitment to total human development that transcends over and above personal interest. And that's the time that the farmers would say, I am doing this because I will be feeding my community, feeding the world. So that's commitment to total human development. And the last stage is psychological transformation such that the power that they have had attained enhances their self-dignity and self-reliance. During the last stage, the farmer and the fisher folk would say, I am a farmer. They will not say, I'm not just a farmer. So unless the farmers and fisher folks will undergo these 5 stages, we cannot ascertain that they are truly empowered. Next, The Agriculture Credit Policy Council, they need to accredit cooperatives implementing ICA as partner lending conduits to provide zero interest loans to small farmers and fisher folk cluster members. And then the DTI to register subsidiary agricultural cooperatives implementing ICA as barangay micro business enterprise under the BMBE law. Next for the DA, they need to accredit and provide support to the parent and or subsidiary cooperative commodity clusters. So they have their criteria for accreditation. Then the next is the DA to accredit and provide support to subsidiary agricultural cooperatives under the Farmers and Fisherfolk Enterprise Development Program by virtue of SAGIP-SACA Act. And then the BIR. The BIR need to provide tax incentives for transactions with non-members of co-ops with more than 10 million general reserve fund or any other forms of tax breaks to those cooperatives implementing ICA through their own or through their subsidiary cooperatives. For all you know, there are large cooperatives who have more than 10 million general reserve fund, who have the intention to engage into large-scale food security projects, but they are constrained in doing so because they will be selling their produce, rice, for example, pork, eggs, they will be selling to non-members, of course. And then they're afraid they will be taxed by the BIR because of this 10 million limit for general reserve fund. Large cooperatives have exceeded this limit. For BIR to provide tax incentives to accredited subsidiary agricultural cooperatives under the Farmers and Fisherfolk Enterprise Development Program by virtue of the SAGIP-SACA Act. And again, BIR to provide incentives to co-op federation providing support to fledgling agricultural cooperatives implementing the ICA. For the Board of Investments to accredit and provide incentives to large co-ops and federations proceeding ICA that are also engaging in big-ticket food security projects. For the DILG to provide incentives to LGUs engaging or partnering with large cooperatives in successful ICA implementation in the respective jurisdiction by including, I have already said this one, the ICA implementation in the cell of local governance criteria and providing reward to outstanding SGLG implementers using ICA in the LGUs. Next, for the CDA, to spearhead in the creation of a technical working group tasked to transform the mentioned insights and key takeaways into tangible programs, projects, and activities. And for the co-op federation, to federations to establish a consortium or a joint venture and put up a national cooperative academy for agriculture and fisheries. The agri-cooperatives can take the lead in the initial groundworking activities towards the establishment of the consortium and the eventual establishment of the training institution. For a start, the Academy can discuss with TESDA on the ways and means for the training institution to be accredited to offer agro-entrepreneurship and C4 qualification, where the cooperatives who have decided to take the lead in ICA implementation can send their respective farm advisors for training and eventual assessment. So this academy would serve as the national training institution for farm advisors. And then later on, the academy will offer other cooperative-related training courses. Here are my long-term recommendations. The previous takeaways are shortened because it can be done. No need of amending any law because the regulations are already there. It's only a matter of harmonization of those regulations. But I have a long-term recommendation. For the enactment of the long overdue Magna Carta for agricultural extension workers. For all you know, there are 3 major national government agencies devolved to the local government unit, the Department of Health, the DSWD, and the Agricultural Extension Services of the DA. There is already the Magna Carta for public health workers. There is already the Magna Carta for public social workers, but there is no Magna Carta for agricultural extension workers. So by that alone, we can see how the prioritization for agriculture, what's the status of the prioritization of agricultural extension in the Philippines. Another, there's a need to enact the agricultural cooperative law. The model in Japan can be visited, so that in Japan, it's opposite. The Japanese cannot live without the co-op because all the aspects of life of the Japanese revolve around cooperatives, and it's because of the enactment of the agricultural cooperative law. In a nutshell, unless the whole of government approach in unleashing the power of cooperation shall be adopted, AFMA's objective of attaining agriculture and fisheries modernization realized even a century or more from the law's enactment. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Chair Sangco, for your practical recommendations and for emphasizing the importance of a whole of a government approach to improve the agriculture and fisheries sector and also to protect and uphold the well-being of our farmers and fisher folk. Okay, so before we go to the open forum, may I ask Dr. Briones for his response to the comments of our guest experts, and you may also ask some of your co-authors to respond to specific comments raised by our discussants. Roel, please.
I think I've spoken enough. May I invite my co-authors to make some responses?
Anyone? Okay, Roel.
Oh, sige. Maybe they're not ready. Yes, so the comments are very well taken, no? I understand that we've covered the academic community, policy community, and farmer community in these reactions, no? And we actually, I got a lot more super specific recommendations that, of course, some of them actually appear in the book in some form or supported or consistent. Others are, I understand, a little bit critical, which I completely, nobody can reach agreement on everything naman, no? But the points are well taken. That's why this is research. So in terms of, say, the feedback from Dr. Javier, the further detail on how to put together the extension is very well taken, rather than municipal level, which was echoed by Mr. Sangco. No, I think we have better prospect at the provincial level rather than completely re-centralize it again. Now, people seem to have forgotten was strongly criticized also before the devolution happened. No, parang DA is not paying attention to this or that, or nakukurakot lang yung pera. So might as well devolve na lang, no? Tapos nung devolve na, bigla nagsisi ulit tayo, di ba? So I think maybe some middle ground of provincial level where you have at least some economies of scope, if I may use economics terminology, like maybe you can't have a PhD in entomology in every municipio, but you can hope to have a cadre of highly qualified agriculturists with even graduate degrees at the provinces, which you see in research institutions worldwide, no? But you actually don't see in Philippines except in some selected research institutions and state universities and colleges such as UPLB, CLSU, and the like, no? So there are many. I'm not saying that but I'd like to take on board a lot of what Dr. Javier said, but this is what struck me. For the legislative, the viewpoint of the policymaker, yes, indeed, it's very valuable that we highlight that it's not just AFMA, and then that's the end. We will modernize. But a lot of follow-up policies need to be enacted. And actually, I was going to highlight really the tarification, which was strongly championed by Senator Villar, which is the embodiment of the market-based approach, no? Plus the plowback formula that is mentioned by Attorney Rhaegee, and is, I think, in the current version of the bill for extending this kind of market-based reform to livestock, poultry, and dairy, and various other industries. So all of this, legislations, as well as the others that she mentioned, are very well taken and would really advance the cause of agri and fisheries modernization. For Mr. Sangco, I appreciate the strong emphasis on the social enterprise and cooperatives part. No, definitely coming from a farmer's perspective, this is really valuable. And the fact na, well, it's not just, let's form 3 cooperatives in this barangay, etc. But maybe there's a chance to say bigger is better. So it's not like we're eliminating all the small ones, but maybe there's a opportunity to consolidate, or maybe make the big ones mentor the smaller ones, so that the smaller ones can also on their own mature and develop. So for instance, I'm not saying that we should adopt this wholesale, but we could look at examples in other countries. In Korea, there is actually a national federation of agricultural cooperatives. Now, during the time of their development, this was a very strong linchpin for all kinds of credit, financial services, extension service, technology, etc. Now that their economy is advanced, maybe there are some criticisms of how it's acting these days. But at the time that it was developing and pushing for its industrialization, it really was the base, no, for rural areas to develop in Korea. And maybe similar models like this could be explored in Philippines and other countries. So all of these reactions and comments are very well taken. They're part of complementing all the main messages of the book.
Roel?
Yes, please. Uncle Emil.
I think it's quite important to note that the panelists were really in agreement with what the authors spelled out in the book. But what we are trying to bring across are really the program details. For example, the interventions of Mr. Sangco is very, very good, because this is where our failures come about, the programming and implementation at the grassroots level. And so the interventions of Mr. Sangco is very, well, I really appreciate, because those are really the brass tacks that we have to address. Because actually, for the most part, the policies are all right. We could do already so much with the policies and legislation, and even with the budget. It's really the program planning. And that's why I appreciate the intervention of Mr. Sangco. Now, for the province-led organization, province-led agriculture fisheries system, it was a realization that the shortcoming was in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th class municipalities, where most of agriculture and fisheries reside, because they don't have money, they don't have enough people, and so on. So we thought that maybe the better locus of integration is at the level of the provinces. But it's not to say that some towns are doing very well. But we thought, but on the average, it's better to locate the locus of integration coordination at the province level. But it's very important that the DA should ante up in terms of budget sharing. That's how the local governments will respond if there is a carrot. So the funding of the DA should now be cost to the provinces and so on, so that the local governments will be very happy to coordinate and work with DA, because there's funding coming. But most importantly, I'm excited with the prospect of 81 mini secretaries of agriculture in all the provinces, if only we could prevail on the governors to drive modernization of agriculture in the respective provinces.
I can only agree.
Okay.
Okay, Roel, thank you very much for your response, and thank you also to Dr. Javier for his additional insights. At this point, let me read some of the unanswered questions in our chat box. Most of them actually have been addressed by your co-authors, and we thank them for that. But still, there are some very interesting questions here. This one is from Aryan Isrim Bukar. Did the author see gaps in relation to improving labor productivity in our agriculture sector? Are there particular recommendations on human resource development? Anyone from our authors? Or
Yeah, may I invite my co-authors, please?
Please. By the way, we are extending the webinar for a few more minutes so we can address the questions. Anyone?
While they're composing their thoughts, mechanization is definitely a key to raising productivity and ensuring that even though we have scarcer labor force, which is now happening actually, there was a slight reversal during the pandemic, but it's actually going back to trend. As workers leave agriculture, the only way to ensure that growth continues is for essentially capital or machines to substitute for the labor. But maybe, I may invite my co-authors or other responses.
Roel, for mechanization, I think it's quite important that we stress that we should provide the support and incentive to our domestic manufacturers. At least yung mga attachment and implements, I don't see why we have to import them. We could easily manufacture them locally. But our program of mechanization should include a very strong provision for encouraging domestic manufacture.
I agree. This is what I mean by modern industrial policy applied to agriculture. So DTI is already spearheading an industrial policy, but sort of, I think agriculture fell through the cracks. But if we could restore that emphasis and pursue this kind of policy now, strategically, government can actually provide strategic support so that the private sector can be the one stepping up to the plate and supplying the myriad of various agricultural machinery, hindi lang tractors, kundi mga processing machines, drying, etc. I actually don't think that we should be importing all of this because it's too difficult and too varied, no? The agronomic environment of the country may require actually our local fabricators to step up.
Okay, thank you for that, Roel. Here is another question, this time from Gerald Kinitio. What is the opinion of the authors on having a separate department for agriculture and fisheries in order to better modernize these sectors? Please?
Department of Fisheries.
Yes, a separate department of agriculture and fisheries.
Because we already have a Department of
Agriculture. We already have one, right?
Yeah, but I think he means Department of Fisheries.
Probably.
I don't know. Do any of my co-author? Okay, Dr. Javier has an idea.
Sorry to monopolize the discussion, but that's one of the important planks of the National Academy of Science and Technology, as well as for our NGO, the Coalition for Agriculture Modernization. We feel that our long-term ambition ought to be a great maritime nation because we have so much resources in addition to our land resources, which are sea-based. And therefore, the way we are going, we are shortchanging fisheries and maritime activities because of our preoccupation with land. As an agronomist, I'm one of those who really recognize that in fact we should really put more emphasis on marine and fisheries. And therefore, I am one of those, including the National Academy of Science and Technology, that we strongly propose, and I hope Attorney is listening, because we are addressing this to Senator Villar to take on the initiative of over a period of time, maybe not immediately, but prepare the ground for the creation of a Department of Fisheries and Marine Resources.
Noted, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Maricor, I think, is raising her hand.
Yes,
Yeah,
please. Go ahead.
yes, I think in 2020, I had a chance to make a presentation to the House Committee on Economic Affairs on the blue economy. And I mentioned about the creation of an enactment of an ocean policy or ocean law. Because as a maritime country, we still don't have a law on the ocean and coastal management. Then secondly, I also mentioned about like a department on the ocean and coastal management, as mentioned by Dr. Javier. But this will not really create a new department, it's rather consolidate those agencies that are already working in the different marine-related sectors, like BIFAR, and then the Coastal Management Office in DNR, because as of now, the fisheries is under the Department of Agriculture, the fishery resource, but the habitat of the fish is under the DNR. So we need to really coordinate, have a consolidation of these sectors. There's also the PICARD, it's also working on research in the aquaculture and the marine sector, captured fisheries also. So then you also have the shipping industry, which also includes the fishing vessels. Then the other related industries that can also support the fisheries, like she mentioned, the manufacturing of the fishing vessels, the equipment, and so on. So perhaps this new department can spearhead the development of the fishery sector and, of course, the wider blue economy sectors. And also,
Maraming salamat.
Yeah.
Go ahead, ma'am.
No, I was also going to mention about the sustainable development aspects, like the environmental protection, because like you said that water is needed for agriculture, but the water is not just coming from the irrigation or the dams. We also need to protect the water resources. And then one aspect that has not really been highlighted is the impact of climate change on agriculture and fisheries. So we need to really prepare for the climate change impacts. Thank you.
Thank you for jumping in the discussion. We appreciate your excellent points, Dr. Ibarvia. Okay, at this point, let us go to another question, and we have one here from DG Romulo Miral of the CPBRD. Given the various constraints mentioned in the modernization of agriculture and fisheries in the Philippines, what would you consider as the most binding constraint? Anyone?
Okay, let me take that one and then invite my co-authors in case they agree or disagree. It is the fragmentation of agricultural fisheries across the board, starting with land and then all the other aspects of services. So we're now trying to restore that. There was a good objective in trying to fragment because previously it was collectivized under very, shall we say, feudalistic arrangement. But now that we've broken it, as Dr. Javier said, we declare victory over that feudal arrangement and now do a more, shall I say it nakedly, capitalistic-based reconsolidation so that we can move more firmly along agribusiness and profit-oriented principles. But maybe my co-authors might have something to say about this.
Anyone, please? Feel free to unmute yourself. Okay, Dr. Javier.
Again, sorry, but
Sige po.
I cannot agree more with Roel Because after all these years, I have come around the conclusion that our main constraint, and we have plenty, is our small fragmented land holdings, whose productivities pale in comparison with what our scientists have demonstrated in experimentation and what our neighbors have achieved. But mind you, our agriculture consists of two sectors. The corporate sector, which is very, very productive and competitive. So talagang problema natin, yung smallness and lack of economies of scale of the rest of our agriculture. The bulk of our agriculture will see small farmer agriculture. So ang solution talaga doon, we really have to cluster and coordinate without necessarily changing land ownership, kasi I realize that's very contentious. But we can consolidate and cluster by different ways. But that's really to me the main constraint, and I cannot agree more with Dr. Briones. That's our main constraint, because in the corporate sector we have proven that we can grow as well and even better than our competitors. But we have all the inputs, and we know what needs to be done. We have the technology, but in the corporate world, you have the supply chain and the ability to compete in the regional and global markets.
If I may add, sir,
Dr. Javier,
if I may
please
add,
go ahead. Please go ahead po.
Another constraint is the financing. The financing of the small farmers in entering into a business.
Thank you for that excellent point, Attorney Rhaegee. We have a question pertaining to the use of emerging technologies, because we're talking about modernization. And Jean-Philippe Garcia has this question: how proactive is our country in seeking out the integration of modern and emerging technologies in improving our agricultural sectors, such as the use of AI, GIS, remote sensing, to name a few? Who would like to answer this question?
Is Dean Bacongis with us?
Dean Bacongis, please.
So we actually, there is a program now spearheaded by various agencies, including PICARD, DA itself, to pursue these digitalization. But again, if I may, like a broken record, it's difficult to imagine. So at the forefront of the adoption is actually the big companies, no? Ito mga drones and so on. And then the only way I can think that these new technologies can be adopted is really by small farmers is only if they form cooperatives, frankly speaking.
Okay.
Yeah. Can I add? I just want to say that, I just want to say that I agree in Roel, no, that there are many available technologies that we can adopt, but it's crucial that we create the necessary atmosphere. So we need to really make sure that economies of scale would come in, so that as in the process you will have learning by doing. So we just don't adopt the technology as is, but slowly through our own experience, we can be able to revise it and reform it to make it more appropriate to our situation.
Okay. Maraming salamat, Dr. Lanzona. Okay. Okay, we have this question from Daniel Agustin, and this is actually addressed to Dr. Javier. Can we adopt the Israel drift irrigation system rather than the WB model, which drowned communities during typhoon times, like what happened in Cagayan, Isabela, and Bulacan? Dr. Javier, this is particularly addressed.
What was the question?
Okay, from Daniel Agustin, he is asking if we can adopt the Israel drift irrigation system rather than the WB model, which drowned communities during typhoon times, like what happened in Cagayan, Isabela, and Bulacan.
Well, in the first place, we need to really conserve and manage our water resources very well. Fortunately, we have been so much water coming to us by way of rainfall, 2,400 millimeters of rain every year, except they come in 5-6 months. So we have to conserve them, trap them in dams and so on, and then use them sparingly for the rest of the year. Now, drip irrigation is one of the modern systems. They are more conservative of water. And in fact, that's one way of delivering your fertilizers as well, most strategically. So there are now situations where drip irrigation makes sense from an economic point of view. So now there are more and more progressive farmers who are getting into drip irrigation. But related to the question earlier of precision and smart agriculture, again, the problem is to make sure that our small farmers have access to the modern technology. Yun ang laging problema. For example, I happen to be the scientific advisor of Del Monte. We have 30,000 hectares of pineapple in Bukidnon. And we are world class. We are beating the hell out of the competition. We have heavily mechanized, we have drones and all kinds of technologies. And that's what I'm saying. The big corporation can take the lead. But the challenge is how to make sure that these small farmers get into the picture as well. So yun ang challenge sa agriculture, the department and the universities and the private sector as well, to make sure that the small farmers have access to these modern technologies. Otherwise, it's not going to help that much, except for the big boys. The big boys can take care of themselves.
Okay.
Can I answer about the drip irrigation?
Please go ahead, po.
Yeah, the Israel government and the province of Bataan has an ongoing training on the use of the drip irrigation. The problem is it's not cost effective for a small farm. They really have to iron out the kinks to be able to adapt it in the Philippine setting. It's easier to do water impounding. It's easier to do dams than the drip irrigation. I don't know why, but the Bataan 1 experience, once they have completed their research, is going to be publicized.
Okay.
Tama si Atty. Yung drip irrigation is feasible if you have a high value product. Otherwise, in many cases, the farmers cannot make economic sense out of it.
Yeah.
But for high value vegetables and maybe for mango, for export, that makes sense.
So my understanding is Israeli agriculture is heavily cooperativized, no? So I think that so that they can invest in these. Because it doesn't also make sense, no, 5 hectares, then you have a drip irrigation and then another beside it. It should be a bigger system, no? Drawing on a common water source and distributing it to a network of farms. And that, again, will require a bit more economies of scale arrangement.
Excuse me, ma'am. Excuse me. Can I also offer my insights on the constraints facing the agriculture?
Sige po, Mr. Sangco, go ahead po, sir.
Yeah, for me, being an agriculturist, there are eight factors that constrain the growth of agriculture. Number one is the enabling environment policies. Then the second is the farmers are not organized. And the third is that there are no reliable markets. When the farmer will plant, there's no assurance that they can sell their produce. The number third, there are no accessible inputs. Not only accessible, the farmers cannot access because of the prohibitive cost. And another constraint is on advisory, so the shattered extension system, agricultural extension. Another is infra. There are already a lot of infrastructure being built, but there are still areas farmers need to need to carry their input and their produce on their shoulders. There are still lots of that. And also the financial, on the financial side, the farmers have a lack of access on credit because the banks will consider them as risky to provide loans. And then the next is on technology options. There are lots of technologies, admittedly, produced by research and development institutions, but unfortunately, hindi nakarating doon sa farmer level. Because of those 8 constraints, that's why the concept of agro-enterprise development is being developed to answer all these constraints. So by engaging into agro-enterprise clustering approach, the enabling environment can, because they have already the voice to negotiate with the local legislators, the mayors on policies favorable to the local farmers. And then on the side of fragmented farmers, they can be already formed into clusters, at least 15 members on the same commodity. And the next would be on market, because if they will be engaging into agro-enterprise, then they can deal with the buyers because they have the bulk of their produce. Because actually it's a chicken and egg. The farmer would say there's no market, but the big buyers would say there's no supply. So we can meet halfway by clustering the farmers. And the next is the accessible inputs. So if they are already clustered, utilizing the principle of economies of scale, they can acquire inputs at a lower price. And also on advisory services. That's why I was saying that farm advisors of the cooperatives can complement with the agricultural extension workers of the government. And then infrastructure, if they have already, because when you ask for farm to market rules and others, then they will be considering the production areas. So if the clusters can also can present that they have already produced, then the infra support will follow. And then for financial services, that's why in agro-enterprise clustering approach, there is a need to partner with a financial institution. It's either a cooperative, or a rural bank, or any formal lending institution to answer those farmers who are not being accepted by the banks, the cooperatives are absorbing them. And then for technology options, hopefully with these farmer clusters all over the Philippines will be growing, and then hopefully the results of the research can easily be brought to the level of the farmers through the agricultural extension workers and the farm advisors. So that's why we are espousing that agro-enterprise development is one of the best ways, if not the only way, to make our farmers and our fisher folks for them to attain a better quality of life. That's all.
Thank you very much, Chair Sangco. Unfortunately, we have to close the open forum, and we have answered most of the questions in our Q&A, and we thank you, our speakers, for addressing them. And to cap the discussion, may I ask Dr. Briones and our discussants for some brief parting words, if you have any. Roel, please go ahead, and then we go to Dr. Javier, Atty. Rhaegee, and Chair Sangco.
Okay, thanks, Sheila, and appreciate all of the interactions, the reactors' comments, the comments and questions from the audience, and actually also the turnout. I think this is a timely topic, and a lot of people are really interested in agriculture and fisheries modernization, and hopefully they will find the book a valuable reference. So certainly, don't just listen to this seminar and think you've already gotten all the insights. It's a book after all, And hopefully you will find the time to read, if not the entire book, at least the chapters that most command your interest. I'm very sure if you're at all active in this field of agriculture, fisheries, policy, programming, modernization, etc., you'll find something of value here. Thank you.
Maraming salamat, Well, and also to your co-authors. Dr. Javier, please, any brief parting words po kung meron man?
Yes, I will reiterate my congratulations to Roel Briones and the authors of the book, because it's a very well written, well thought out analysis. And I think clearly we are in broad agreement with what had been described and prescribed in the book. So now we really have to go down into how do we implement this in terms of programs at the grassroots. Now, one of the most important considerations is the public expenditure for agriculture. All these years, the level of government support for agriculture is in the order of 1.5, 1.7% of the budget. Our competitor ASEAN countries, they spend 4 to 6%. But right now, with the Congress now and with President Marcos, I think there was a substantial increase. Of course, with the leadership of Senator Villar, I think we're now almost at 2.5%. So we are getting there. So now the challenge is really making good on the plans that we have put together in the NAPMI, as well as in this very important contribution from the PIDS. And I think by and large, I'm quite optimistic, because I think from our book launch, I think we're mainly in agreement. And in fact, the contribution of the discussants have been, how do we enrich and how do we implement at the grassroots levels the initiatives spelled out in the book. So I think things will get going, and with God's will and hard work, I think we'll make agriculture move forward and modernize it as we want it to be under up.
Maraming salamat, Dr. Javier. And Attorney Rhaegee? Ma'am?
This afternoon, I think we have created an enabling framework of discussing the problems and the mechanism and how to get there. Using business solutions, using cooperatives. By closing, let me quote Charles Darwin: "If the misery of the poor be caused not by the laws of nature, but by our institution, great is our sin." So let us all be instruments of rural development, sustainability, food security, income generation, and poverty reduction. It is incumbent upon us that we have the knowledge and skill and maybe a little influence in government. We can move agriculture forward by modernizing it. I would like to congratulate PIDS, Roel, and the rest of the authors for doing a good job. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very well said, Attorney Rhaegee. And of course, last but definitely not the least, Chair Sangco. Please, sir.
Yes, I would like also to express my deepest thanks to PIDS for this very, very wonderful book. I've read from page to page, and I have many realizations. I've been in government service for many years, but the book had spoken so much that I've learned a lot. And also I would like to express my appreciation that the representative from the farmers and the cooperatives of extension workers has been selected to become a discussant. I am very much proud of myself being included with the stature of the other two, Dr. Javier and Attorney Rhaegee. So I'm very much appreciative of the fact that we were able to expound what we were discussing at the local level. At least we have brought it at the national level to this forum. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all our guests. And again, congratulations to all the authors for this timely and comprehensive book, which the PIDS hopes will inform the discussion and national direction on transforming agriculture and fisheries into a dynamic, technologically advanced, and competitive sector. Let us acknowledge them through a big virtual clap. Okay, and we also appreciate everyone's active participation in the open forum. And before we close, here are the winners of our webinar raffle. Okay, please hold. Okay. We have Felix Lucit, Roan. Okay, I think this is Director Roan Bakal. And Dr. Corazon Barba. Maraming salamat po. The webinar team will contact you for the delivery of your prize. And finally, we have some reminders. Okay, you can access all the presentations from today's webinar on the PIDS website. Please also answer the feedback survey that will pop on your screen after this webinar. Your comments are important for us to improve our virtual events. In addition, please regularly visit our website and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We also have a YouTube channel where you can access the recordings of all our events. Okay. And for our last webinar for this month, we will have a hybrid forum on March 23 on the topic, Maximizing Social Impact, the Power of Data in Public Policy. It's from 3 to 5 p.m. and you may join the discussion on Zoom. We will release the registration details tomorrow. PIDS is co-organizing this event with ID Insight, the Ateneo School of Government, and the Ateneo Policy Center. And finally, we would like to acknowledge the various organizations from the government, academe, civil society, business, and international development community. Also, our friends from the media that joined us today. Maraming salamat po. And thank you very much for staying on until the end of the webinar. This concludes our book launch. Hope to see you again at our succeeding events. Thank you and have a good day.